My first degree is in education, so I do apply AI to education. I've been using Scholar for these last 10 years and looking into Cyber Scholar as well. I hope there's a workshop around later on I would like to attend. And yeah, Turing is the main great-grandfather of AI. McCarthy coined the term AI. Turing used to call them machines that think, thinking machines more than anything. But what Bill said, between the first and the second stage, there was an important evolution of artificial neural nets in the 80s. And that was a very important point, which takes me to your cyber explanation. You say oars. Actually, it's not the oars, it's the rudder that the guy at the back is controlling. It's the rudder. And when the people at sea, the Romans, Phoenicians, the Greeks, I don't know, had the right boat, the right people on the oars, and a fantastic guy who's controlling the rudder, they controlled the Mediterranean, literally. So they had these three things that aligned: a good boat, oars, obviously, or wind, and the guy who controls actually the controlling part, which is the cyber, as Bill said, truly. And this is what happened in 2022. A disruption. And three stars, again, aligned. And these were masses and masses of data that previous to 1993 World Wide Web, this wasn't available. So data. The second one is the engine behind it, which is the artificial neural net, for sure. And the third one, so we have the data, the artificial neural net, and the machines, and what we call GPUs, or multiple processing units running in parallel. So these three stars aligned after 2010, more than anything. 2015, Google, actually, the paper you showed there, Google researchers were thinking about it, published in 2017. Others picked it up, OpenAI, and the rest is history, 2022, which is only about 40 months ago, if you think about it. But it's a major disruption, just as Mary said, Gutenberg and the printing press, 1440 was a major disruption. This is massive. And not just massive, I don't want to be sounding as an alarmist. Actually, usually people accuse me of being an AI advocate more than anything. But the thing is that students have a choice at this point, and this is what I want to talk about. And even though I like Scholar, looking forward to work in Cyber Scholar as well, I know it's a private LLM, as Mary said, it's within its firewall, so not into the wild. AI still makes errors. So some of you might use, for example, Notebook LM from Google, which processes your own documents. And if it does not figure out how to please the user or please the prompt that the user is asking, it confabulates stuff, what notoriously known as hallucinations. It's a confabulation, actually. It's a mathematical, statistical, probabilistic model that is at the back. If it doesn't find the right amount, 75, 85%, it confabulates stuff. It will invent a reference, the most notorious one, obviously. So there's a percentage of error that I think is important that we keep in mind. So those were a bit of reactions. Maybe we can also talk about them later on. So my presentation is more about, so those were, I was taking notes more than anything. A short presentation, but it's about a choice again, about a cognitive choice. Because students find the path of least resistance. I think we all know. Especially young students, and in computer science, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. As simple as that. So, especially young students, 11, 12-year-old. Okay, we work in higher education, but I still worry about these students that will hit my benches, come to my school, to my university in 4 or 5 years' time. Actually, the new entrants already have 3 years of experience with generative AI, and yet they are already passing on some skills to the machine. It's also called cognitive offloading. So our work, as Mary correctly said, has changed as educators. So again, I'm not being pessimistic, but there is a way forward. So in this presentation, I want to talk about a paper I wrote this year as well, which is from Cognitive Necessity, which was a necessity prior to 2022, onto cognitive choice. And given the choice of using Cyber Scholar, they still have a choice before entering anything into Cyber Scholar to go to Gemini, Copilot, ChatGPT. I'm not saying they're cheating. I don't like using the word cheating, but they could bypass that process to a machine. And I see nothing wrong in that as long as they process it themselves. And the best way to do it is to recommend the best ways to do it. And this is what I want to talk about today. So yes, in the past, we had access, content, we had platforms, but we still had to think about it. Obviously, now with this AI generating outputs, and if I'm lazy enough, I don't even bother to read it, I just copy and paste even a confabulated, a hallucinated reference. That not worries me, bothers me actually. It used to bother me before when a student gives me a draft with spelling mistakes. And I tell them, why do you give me a draft with spelling mistakes when we have a spell checker? And I had no problem with people using the spell checker. Why should I have a problem? Actually, some of our academics, I think, around the world, have a problem with people, students using Gen AI, generative AI, using a technology. My teachers in the 70s had a problem with me using a calculator, blah, blah, blah. Yes, because they thought I would lose the skill of adding mentally, numbers mentally. But the thing is that there's this shift. You mentioned a shift. There's this massive shift. A digital disruption, which is actually creating a cognitive disruption, where in the future, we could actually distinguish between people who can think using their own brains and people who don't bother thinking at all. And like any other skill, like a language, if you do not practice it, you will actually lose it. So imagine a 12-year-old, 11-year-old continuously using whatever, typically ChatGPT, unfortunately, and year after year, let's say 4, 5, 6 years, gets to my first-year degree, and I don't know, no power, no Wi-Fi, and they need to think there and then. Maybe an IT student is not that big deal, but what about a medical student who has to think because a patient just is having a heart attack? How are they going to solve the problem now? Should they go to their phone to check out how to solve a problem? So that is a problem. So a shift is there. And what's happening in education, that the major disruption isn't the assessment process, because educators, okay, the lazy educators just did not bother. They kept on going on their life as if nothing happened. But other educators, post-2022, said, no, you know, I won't give out an essay to write because I know students can bypass the cognitive process. So actually performance does not transfer to cognitive knowledge transfer anymore. And this dilemma, obviously, is a problem, because you can see outputs are sort of preceding thinking right before, asking a question to somebody, an opinion, and these people go to their phone rather than having an opinion. And unfortunately, learning no longer requiring performance. The process of reading, processing, critically, eventually outputting your thoughts, maybe on paper. But even writing, Bill mentioned writing. To me, actually, writing became a luxury. I really enjoy writing. And this is actually a fact that even artists are worried because Gen AI is taking their job. Actually, I think their art, their output will become much more valuable. I think there will be a time where it will be a luxury to go to a doctor who is a human. I think it will be a luxury to send your children, actually it will cost you more, to send your children to a school where the teachers are human rather than machines. So it will be actually raise the value over there. So all the assumptions we had about assessment, and obviously I like the formative assessment rather than the exam, obviously, which is not a natural way to assess, have been broken. We need to adjust, we need to adapt, and at some point there is this choice where students get to this fork in the road of their education where they're either going to be thinking or where thinking is optional, okay? A disengagement, which is masked as performance. And how can we break that? Formative assessment is one of them, but there are other ways, and this is one way. This is what we should be doing as educators. In fact, I think if you look at the process before pre-generative AI, where cognition was a necessity, we had this sequential level of instruction. Go read this paper, go investigate. If you don't want to look at the website, look at the website. Pre-2022. And students sort of couldn't again cheat because we had detection software to detect you copy directly from a website, like Turnitin. And yeah, those, as Bill said, they do not work for AI generation detection. They do not work. You cannot reverse a neural net, an artificial neural net, up till now. Still, if a student is using a technology, is using Gen AI, is using artificial neural nets, and the student is understanding the concepts, is acquiring the knowledge, I have no problem. Education is working. So if a student writes an essay, delivers a presentation, a chart, an infographic, and he or she can walk me through it and explain their thinking process, walk me through it during a presentation. Then, and they can do it, obviously, the learning process has worked. Again, you know, just 2 months ago, we had our first semester exams, which is, I do not do exams, I had an assignment, and I called the student in. And I asked the student to walk me through his thought process. Show me your working. Show me what were you thinking when you wrote this. And he or she needs to explain. At one point, I told him, look at this reference. I want you to find this reference. It was a paper. I was the author, and I never wrote this paper. Big mistake, you know, because actually, obviously I know papers I wrote. I told him, I want you to find me this paper, because I would love to see this paper that I never saw, but I wrote apparently. The title was perfectly aligned with the topic. Yeah. And he was so convinced that he tried to Google it in front of me. Incredible, you know, it's incredible. So this cognitive gap, you can see. No way. And that's the proof, you know. Actually, then I went to the code, doing a Python program. I asked about the code. Maybe you can bullshit yourself through it. But then I said, why did you set these hyperparameters to a particular value? And he had no answer. It was just copied and pasted, unfortunately. So this optional, as you can see on the right, is there. Unless the student from a very young age, we tell them what to do, you know. I want you to use different engines. I want you to acquire, look for ideas. As we looked for ideas in books, the generation after myself, like Nancy, used websites. Now they use Gen AI to get ideas and then obviously adapt and adopt. So this is the cognitive divide that will be happening of AI-guided thinkers to AI-dependent users. Over-dependent, as I said, and potentially not even having their own opinions, who accept who submit, reproduce, and eventually, which I'm not saying, there might be some who will be successful in life, plenty of bullshitters out there who are successful in life. But yes, as educators, we don't want that. We want people who can control the technology to their advantage, who can critique, who can steer and use the rudder as before. And obviously, I can see these two emerging learner profiles happening in the near future. So, again, to the topic we have today, what does actually human-centered mean? Human-centered in education, we want to preserve this agency, this beautiful agency of cognitive, critical thinking, where I can grab ideas from different sources. Again, could be books, could be watching Bill and Mary give a presentation, websites, Googling, Gen AIing, and then form my own thought and put them on paper or put them on a word processor. So we want to design for thinking, not for outputs. And obviously, we want this equitable engagement, and we want to ensure that students know that they can use the technology freely, transparently, rather than saying, I do not want you to use calculators, I do not want you to use word processors, I do not want you to use Gen AI. Okay, so that would be a problem. So yes, the design problem, first of all, obviously, the responses apart from exams, which tries to solve the assessment problem, I think it's a time-restricted solution. Eventually, technology will catch up to exams. I don't know what will happen in exam halls, maybe like I just did going through PASP, through airport now, they do a full check, checking if I have earpieces, if I have something under my wig, or if I have, I could have my phone in my bag outside the room and I can still be communicating through a small camera on my spectacles, which is processing, sending messages, generating and sending me messages. So actually, it's only current response. Again, AI detection is not available at the moment. I do not know what can happen in 10, 15 years' time. People who plagiarized pre-Google and copied and pasted from websites, some of them even politicians out there, were caught out using Turnitin, uploaded their thesis, and they figured out, 15 years ago, you plagiarized. But can this happen in the future? In 15 years' time, when a piece of software, I don't know, let's call it Super Turnitin, and figures out that actually this was AI generated, and I can prove it to you. It doesn't happen now, of course. But if I can explain, if I can walk through my thinking process, still there's no plagiarism, still it's mine. Keep in mind that these engines produce creatively original stuff, unintentionally. There's no intention, okay? So there's no intention in that. And obviously, banning the tools, which are the current responses. Yes, the limitation is we need to focus on control, not learning. How can we control this damage? How can we control this major disruption, which happened in 2022, and it's still going on? So we use what we call a cognitive engagement-centered assessment framework, which we want to explicitly put the cognitive in focus, which is process visibility. We want to see the process, how you went through it. And it is AI agnostic, robust on that way, and accountable on the metacognitive side of it. From a more practical point of view, and I'll give some examples in the next slide, but we want to be explicit in what cognitive process we're doing apart from the learning objectives, okay? We want to have evidence that actually the student is going through a thinking process. Asking is one major way, obviously. Oral exams and a viva have been popular. I think will become much more popular. But there is a whole range of doing an oral, asking a question, Mary, what do you think of this? 1 minute question. Even that is an oral, because and I ask that student, and that student, and that student. And I do this in class. And I have classes bigger than this audience. Yet, I do it in class. I give a task for next week, and then I'm going to ask 3 to 5 of you. And I don't identify whom there be. They could be on Zoom still, and still ask questions, and perform assessment as we go along. So I'm designing these tasks specifically. And actually, when I design the task, I'm the first to try it out on the Gen AI. I want to try it out myself to figure out how much they can get achieved with that. So being accountable for the metacognition to support the learners. And ensure learning through the design, not the detection. In fact, these are some practical ways. I said the top one, and there are shades of these. I wrote a paper just on different ways of doing oral assessment. I think it's the future of how we should be doing assessment. We do it in class all the time. I know some educators still sticking their to exams. Their knee-jerk reaction is exam. It's a safe environment. I'm sure they're not copying. But are we preparing our students, or they're just learning by rote? And as Bill said, just learning for the exam, and that's it. Other examples through this framework: reflective AI use declarations, or reflections on how they performed the task. And yet, realistically, they can generate them as well. They can generate the reflections, okay? And so again, I would go back to one. I saw you said this reflection. What were you thinking when you said this? What was your thought process? Show me the working, as we used to do in mathematics, to show that we didn't use the calculator. Show me the working, okay? And yes, process all the logs and the critique tasks. I like this part where you mentioned the logging of the Gen AI. If they use the Gen AI, it's being logged. However, they can choose not to use Cyber Scholar. They use Cyber Scholar, but they can bypass it, and they use other tools and then go to Cyber Scholar again, It takes a thief to catch a thief. And finally, iterative assignments, one building on top of the other, especially when it's in a group work, would be fantastic. Okay, I want to close down slowly. I think there's a transformation happening in schools, in institutions, from policy to practice. I do encourage and recommend that all education institutions, University of Malta was very reactive. In 2023, we had a policy. I was pushing and bothering the rector big time to do it. Now we have that all students from all faculties in their first 2 weeks have a workshop on how to use generative AI in academic research and in academic writing. I can give this 3-hour workshop if I find space over here. So we use something like, I can skip one of my slides. I lost my mouse, but don't worry. I use this handout, for example. You can take it if you manage to get the QR code. And this is a handout of how they can use Gen AI, various different tools that you can see on the right, which continues evolving, on how to do a literature review, how to download PDFs, on how to design extraction processes, on how to extract actually information from different papers, while maintaining the ethical academic integrity of doing a literature review, and eventually using the tools as well to write and to assist students as well. I do this for doctorals too, and actually these are workshops we do for academics. In the first week, independent if they're from arts, we do it for our ICT students, but obviously it could be done for all others. So quickly back to this, I think this transformation from policy to practice, from access to fluency, and from compliance to capability, and how they're capable of doing this, policies, We do workshops for the policymakers as well. In Malta, I gave a workshop on the use of Gen AI to Parliament. I think unfortunately I did it this year. That's when because an election is coming by soon. But I think they should have had it in 2022 or 2023, okay? So, if cognition is actually optional, eventually the whole success of education depends on prior knowledge, on your confidence of using these tools as source providers of knowledge, and self-regulation. It's easy to tell you guys, adults, that you need to do this, this, and that. One of them is, do not use one engine. Why? Because the tendency to copy and paste from one engine increase tenfold. If I give you one source, you tend to take a photo. If I give you 2, 3 sources, you tend to read all 3 of them, and then you want the best out of them. Yeah, you just process the information. That's what we want to do in education, okay? So there is this hidden risk, this hidden inequality as a risk. So I'm saying let's reclaim learning through thinking, through good practices. And I'm going to give you quickly 5 recommendations to take away with you, okay? We try to break this poor design. I had the slide where we explained the different engines we use. We use different engines generic. As you can see, Bill mentioned many of them, which are included in Cyber Scholar as well. Plenty of them are Western, and obviously they're biased. Some of them are, one of them is European, Mistral, the big M is Mistral. A couple are Chinese, which again, biased in their own way, maybe even politically biased, like DeepSeek and Quen. And obviously others are used for image generation. The latest one is NanoBanana number 3, which is very, very powerful, available for free with a Google account, with a Gmail account. And others we use for research. So I use these in my workshop on how to perform a literature review. Specifically in our university, we have an agreement with Google since 2000 actually. So actually we use their tools very, very much. Notebook LM is a very powerful tool. If you haven't used Notebook LM, I recommend you go and use it because it acts as if you have a private LLM as well. So these are the 5 issues I have. People using a single engine. They're using it looking for an answer. Wrong. They should be looking for ideas. And automatically doing these 2 together, they will offload or unload this cognitive process that I spoke about today. Some of them are scared because the educator might mark them down, so they're not transparent, and eventually they're not accountable. Explain, and they're not able to explain. So yes, I do have solutions for all of them, hopefully, and I mask them as best practices. Use a handful, seek ideas, use it as a partner, be transparent and own your process and stand by your work. So quickly through these 5, this is the handout I spoke about. First guideline, 5 slides. 1, prompt a handful of engines. Why? First of all, using more than one source, your ideas, your results are more comprehensive. The fact that I have a number of sources, I want to know which is the best out of them. I'm picking, I like this, I prefer this one, this is a good idea, this is a crappy idea. I'm thinking about them. So the temptation to copy and paste, especially from an 11-year-old, let alone an adult. And if there is one of them is biased, using 2 or 3, the bias is reduced. The second one is seek ideas, not answers. Use Gen AI as a launching pad, not to replace you, to boost you, okay? I want my distinct voice, my insights. I want to critically frame every paper I write in my own words, in my own critical thinking, in my own academic signature. Okay, it takes me less time to write a paper. I'm going to be honest, where previous years I used to write maximum 5 papers, now I do 10 in a year. I have fantastic collaborators, and I'm not talking about my peers at the faculty. So I have 3 to 5 engines. I do not use more than 5. And they're giving me ideas all the time. But then I decide. Third guideline, let's use AI as a partner. I like this term, intellectual sparring partner, which is not mine, by the way. I got it out of one of the engines. I like it, now I own it. And in this way, I can give my drafts for these engines to critique them, argue against them. Look, this is my research claim, this is my hypothesis, go ahead, disagree, from 3 different points of view. This is how I did my data analysis. There might be another way of doing it. Let me ask 3 engines of how they've been trained with the millions and millions of data of how to do it. Number 4, own your process, okay? So definitely take intellectual ownership of them. I just generated this image of me holding a placard in my own language. Okay, it did it on its own. I had an initial image, it generated, and I'm not ashamed to say that I use Gen AI, not at all. I'm the author, I'm the thinking mind behind it. And actually a student who is transparent and tells me I did this, this, and that, they have to do an appendix on which engines they use and which prompts they used. To me, that's integrity. It's academic integrity. And if a journal or a conference tells me not to use AI because they will reject my paper, I will not declare. I will still use AI. But I'd rather not actually submit a paper there. Finally, be accountable, stand by your work, ask me any question of these slides that have been generated, by the way, and I can answer. Because I own the thought behind them. I was the one who led the thinking. I can explain my thought process. Okay? So let's grade students on how they think, rather than what technology they use. Okay? The publishing, the printing, as you said, was a disruptor. Academics were against it, by the way, back then. They said, because now students are going to have all the knowledge in their hands. Well, you know, we accept the book. I think this will get accepted eventually, maybe in a shorter time. Thank you very much.
Okay, maybe we're going to start with a question over here. Yes, yes. Do you mind? Yes, I would just stand up and say that. Okay,
I love her. Yes, thank you very much. As a professor, I see some issues with doing the oral examination. I think that's fantastic, and that's where you need to go. But how do you then give them a grade? Because I know they often come back. Is there a rubric that you use? How do you defend your grade to them?
I think it's a good point, and obviously the answer is a rubric. So actually these engines are really good at generating rubrics. Then you check them out, grab some ideas, and create a rubric on how to assess. They've seen so many rubrics, so can they generate them? We have actually a number of problems, but one regulation our university have, you cannot run a presentation, a viva, on your own. So we have to be 2 or more academics as a proof, because if the student says, you know, I think I should have got a better mark, I shouldn't have failed, then 2 of us, me and Mary, were there, and we can testify, sort of, that actually it wasn't right. I'm trying to go beyond that and use Zoom recording as my testimony, The university hasn't accepted it yet. We've just changed our rector, and next week I have a meeting with the rector. So yeah, so I'll be pushing that as well with the rector, because it will facilitate a lot of things. Within a class, come back to your question, as I said, formatively, I cannot ask, but I can do 1 minute quick shots to query students, especially if I'm suspicious about some assignments, and I'll put them on the spot. Apart from the policy of university that I can call in anybody at any point after an assessment has happened. So again, I can call in Chrissy to my office, get Mary as a testimony, and we ask questions. Why did you write this piece of code? What is this particular Python function doing? I get into the code, really dirty my hands, because these engines are fantastic at generating code, massively. And I want students to use it, as long as they understand it, because industry out there do that exactly. And if I do not prepare my students for industry, I am failing as an educator, actually. So in industry out there, so a very important connection is to keep connected with industry. IT companies, and we ask them what they do, they generate code, 50,000 lines of code in less than 2 minutes, and then they have to go through it. And it works, okay? I hope I answered your question.
Can I add something to that? I mean, the most important thing I think that you've said today is the word design. And we have designed education, as I think I showed, from kindergarten through to high school in particular ways, right? With traditional expectations about knowledge and cognition and whatever. And this is a disruptive, transformative moment, as you've said. And the systems, I mean, we're talking to you as professors, teachers, academics, individuals, but the systems also, I think, as Matt quite rightly said, need to rethink the architectures, the ecosystems in which we learn, the policies that are involved, how to be hybrid, moving in and out of in-person gatherings, lecture-type events, e-learning, and using AI in classrooms. It requires a different ecosystem, right? Now, we're stumbling towards that, and Matt gave a lot of suggestions about how to do it. We've got an example of how you might do it in the classroom. We're all moving in that direction, but until our leaders also recognise that the labour and the way that labour is organised and that the way that education is organised also needs to be freed up to have the human end as any way we want it, and the technology end and the AI end. But it's a messy moment, and our systems are trying to figure out how to contain it or how to create rules for it. I mean, I know even at our own university, we just, it is very hard, even when you're innovative in your own university. Matt, you in your university and we in our university, it's hard to get the system to enable the kinds of things that need to be done.
Let's move on to the next question.
The next question.
Yes, thank you very much. So I was thinking about your discussion of cognitive offloading and this topic of choice. So I'm faculty, and there's been a lot of focus on those two topics from the perspective of the student. I'm wondering from our perspective as educators, as the faculty member, now I have a choice, and I can choose to cognitively offload my feedback to students. So, you know, I'm going to share this because I'm assuming this is a safe space. So, like, you know, there I am on Friday, and I have 75 to 100 undergraduate research papers in front of me, and it would be fantastic if I could provide in-depth feedback for every student. So what I could choose to do is paste the question prompt, paste the rubric into an AI machine, and say, generate all the feedback for me, and what score should I give the student? and something that would take me all weekend to do, I could do it in an hour. And so I'm running into like a moral existential crisis where I'm feeling guilty for even having this choice, and then I spiral into like, is this fair to my student? Does my student even need me? So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. So one of the things is that the feedback that our system gives to our students is more extensive and better than the feedback we could ever give. And we're operating at a doctoral level, a master's level, so that must filter all the way down the system. If you're spending a lot of time reading essays over and over again and writing cursory comments, it's actually no longer the right thing to do. So what's the role of the educator? What we've done is we've had two pieces of specialist input that we've put into this. One is we've built these rubric agents, which are these carefully thought through epistemic criteria, if you like. So we've built those as educators, and we've built this tool where you can build your own for any particular domain. You know, any domain in the world you can build it for. I showed two examples, a medical example and an EdTech example. The second thing we've done is we've curated the knowledge base, right? So the knowledge base is like the reading list, but the reading list doesn't have to be what's manageable. It can be something that's completely unmanageable. You can put in 50 articles, 20 books, anything you can get as a PDF, you can put in. So in other words, what you've built is you've built a specialised substantive knowledge base and a specialised set of epistemic criteria by which students have. So in other words, it's the collective intelligence idea. What we've done is we as educators have actually actively built this environment, and when the student gets your feedback, it's actually you speaking, right? You're speaking through the machine. That means your job's changed. Now, it's not a hard job, to be quite frank, but we will never go back to marking essays ever again, right? But our argument with the students is that we've built the rubric agents, we've built the knowledge base, and therefore it's us, and it's mediated by the machine. So that's the shift. But the answer is don't ever mark 75 essays ever again and write handcrafted. I mean, that's a crazy waste of time.
Yeah, my take on that, I won't be marking essays because I won't be giving essays anymore. As simple as that. So I teach ethics and AI, and in 2022 I had this dilemma. We used to give them an essay to write about the use of AI in education, of the use of AI in hospitals, of AI at work, and the ethics of all that. So what did I do? Use 3 to 5 engines. Actually, I used 3 engines, Perplexity, Claude, Copilot, to give me ideas of how and some of them were crappy ideas until one of them was a good idea. Change your assessment process into a debate. So I still gave out the topics, use of AI and ethics in training, in education, in finance, and so on and so forth. But then the students had to perform in a public debate. Created a rubric to answer the other question, created a rubric, and all the academics, the public was invited as well, so it was similar to this, and students had to debate, counter debate, argue, give examples from real life, and that's what they were assessed on. It's an idea which has been working for these last 3 years.